Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm Andrew Seaman, the LinkedIn news editor for Job Search and Careers, welcoming you to our weekly chats where we talk about finding work during these challenging times. As always, I want to welcome you to the show, and I hope that you'll introduce yourselves in the comments. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us why you're searching for work. Tell us where you're searching for work, and also just a little bit about what you hope to get in your next position. And then after that, what I want you to do is watch the people who are introducing themselves. And maybe you see someone in your area. Maybe you see someone who's looking in the industry you work in or the industry where you want to work in, and connect with each other. Networking is so important to a job search. And what better time to start than now? Some of the best messages I receive after the shows are from people who actually connect and start job searching together and exchanging resumes and helping each other with their job search. And I think that's such a wonderful way to job search. And it also helps people land work a little bit faster, according to past research. So please do that. And also, after that, get your questions in because we're going to have an expert on in just a bit to answer all of your questions. But I want to welcome all of those of you who are introducing yourselves into the stream. We have Kendra from Los Angeles, Wesley from Denver, my good friend Jay from Brooklyn, Andrew from Canada, not me, Jessica from Texas, Richard from Chicago, and we know we have other people tuning in from around the world. So thank you for joining us. And without further ado, I want to introduce our guest for today. Her name is Madeline Mann, and she is the founder of Self-Made Millennial. So welcome to the show, Madeline.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
Yes, definitely. And well, first, before we get started, I think a lot of people probably know you from your post, from your signature, name on LinkedIn, where you have the emojis with the little oranges on them. What I was hoping to tell you a little bit about your background, because it's so interesting. You have Self-Made Millennial, which I hope you'll tell us how that came about, but you also work in HR, so you have an inside perspective about what's going on. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you created Self-Made Millennial and why?
Absolutely. So I was the head of HR at a technology company in Los Angeles, and I was the one who was on the front lines reading resumes, seeing all of the feedback come back from interviewers after interviews. I was the one who was in the back room talking about who is going to be promoted and really understanding all of these conversations with executives of how they're perceiving both candidates and employees. And I thought, if only people, especially job seekers, knew how they were being perceived, they would just make easy, simple tweaks in their job search process that would make them so much more vastly in demand. And so what I started doing, Andrew, was I started actually replying to resumes and applications and telling them the exact reason why they were rejected. And this is before they even got an interview. And I thought, wow, I'm going to be everyone's hero. This is what everyone wants, right? And I was completely wrong. People do not like unsolicited feedback. And so I got a lot of negative emails back. And so I thought, okay, no more unsolicited feedback. I am going to start putting all of these behaviors that I'm noticing that really click and help people to land these career-defining jobs, and I'm going to put them into a YouTube series. So I built my YouTube channel, Self-Made Millennial, which is now spun off to a TikTok channel and a LinkedIn presence. And I now have an audience of over 450,000 people who tune in to check out my advice as from the perspective as someone who is in the HR function day in and day out. I am seeing these different patterns. As soon as COVID hit, I completely shifted my messaging because I was seeing it live, like happening in practice, and really giving job seekers that real-time information, and not tips that are old and are just things that I learned from landing one job once or being in, this career path many moons ago.
Yeah, definitely. And well, I know so many people, turn to you for advice and see your advice on LinkedIn. So I appreciate you joining us. And, one thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, because it's something that I see pop up quite a bit in people's comments and messages to me, and also just in general. And it's job seekers who they maybe want to change careers, but they're not sure. And they have a ton of experience and they just don't know what they want to do. So a lot of times they sort of say, well, I could still be an accountant, if they are an accountant, but maybe I want to go into finance in terms of, working at a bigger bank or something like that. So for job seekers, is it important to have a focus? What should people do if they find themselves in that position?
Yes. And this happens all the time. We have so many skills and we're like, I could add so much value in so many different jobs and areas. And what I call these people are multi-passionates. You have a lot of different things that you can add and a lot of things you're passionate about. And so put in the chat in the comments if you are a multi-passionate, because I'm sure there's so many of you out there. And so it's tough for us multi-passionates to pick a lane. But here's the thing. It is so important to focus on a certain path because companies are essentially looking for two things. They're looking for the person who is going to be the absolute best at the job and serve the purposes of the role. And so by you being specific about what you can bring as value to them, that helps them a lot. And the second thing is, and it might sound a little fluffy, but it's actually true, is they want to choose the person who is the most passionate about that career path. What happens is when we can tell as hiring managers and recruiters, if someone is kind of has their hands in a lot of different potential paths and hasn't really chosen. And the problem is companies do not want to be your career experiment. What I created this term career experiment because it's this idea of we do not want to like just take this job to see if this is a path you like, because retention is difficult. Then it's really expensive to then replace you later. We'd rather hire someone who's like, I have been building skills in this area. I might not have a ton of experience in this, but I've dedicated my life to learning these skills. I'm so confident that this is the right next step. And if you show those that you've been putting a lot of time in and that you are super confident in your next step, the company goes, okay, this person isn't treating us like a career experiment. They know this is the right next step, so we can better retain them. And also they're easier to be self-motivated, right? It's tough to motivate someone if they kind of get into a job and they think, oops, I got into the wrong job. And now, it's not intrinsic anymore.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And first I need to apologize if you ever hear background noise. It's the Symphony of New York City I'm offering you. So if you hear horns honking, that's what it is. But I think that's great advice. And we have so many people in the stream who are saying, they're multi-passionate. Like you said, we have Heather, Rican, Melinda, Veronica, Mateo, and Lori, and just so many others who are saying, this describes them. So for people who are multi-passionate, how do they pick a lane? So, once they say, okay, that's why the employers see it as so important to have someone who's focused and driven in that area. How do you decide, from this buffet of offerings of your career, how do you choose which dish to go for?
Yes, this is so important. So a lot of people go, and this is why I just don't think you should just get random career advice from friends and family unless they really have a path that shows that they really have a lot of career coaching experience. But you want to focus not on your passions and what are your hobbies and what are the industries that you think sound really cool. That often leads us astray. Instead, you want to focus on your strengths and your values. What we found is that career mastery, feeling like you're really mastering skills, is something that is highly correlated with career happiness, as well as being extremely clear before you start job searching. What are your values? I have a job searching program called Executive Career Accelerator. And I just had a student 2 days ago who's telling me how she wants to go into this new position, but she's not sure if it's like a position where she'll be working in kind of solitary work where she's, really focused on something, or if she'll be collaborative. And she's like, I need to work somewhere that is collaborative. That's a value. She's thinking about her values. Another value would be, I really want to work somewhere that I can go home at 5 and be with my family. I don't want to work somewhere where it's around the clock, that I'm always being called in. Think through these values that you have. And when you know what your strengths and values are, you survey all different types of jobs out there. You look, you do a bit of research, and then you have to talk to people in that career. I cannot sit up here and tell you if you're good to be, an executive assistant or not. You need to go talk to executive assistants, ask them a bunch of questions about their career path. Is your work more solitary or is it collaborative? What are some of the hours that you work? How long did it take you to get to where you are today? What are some of the skills you built? And then you have to put this all through the filter of what your strengths are and your values are, and be really, really evaluate, is this something that would make me happy? And when you do that, you do a bunch of informational interviews, this helps you to get more clarity of, okay, these are the types of jobs I could do. These are the types of jobs that I would suffer through. And weirdly enough, is that when you've built those relationships, those are the relationships that often come back once you've chosen that path and help you get a job.
Definitely. And I think, forging those relationships are so important. And what's really interesting and what I kind of like about networking or relationship building is that you never know which relationship is actually going to pay dividends. So, down the road, someone that maybe you talk to a few times and you establish a connection with, later on, all of a sudden, they're the ones who are actually saying, hey, my employer has this job here. And from talking to you, I think you have the background that would align with what we're looking for. And it might be completely out of left field. And that's why it's so good to just keep talking to people over time. So I think that's such great advice.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. And it's when I did this process myself many, many years ago, I realized, wow, market research, I'd worked in market research, I talked to people in market research, I learned what the path was. And I was like, I'm going to be looking at this data for many years going forward. It's going to take me this many years to get to the more strategic evaluating, what to do with this information. And I thought, I know I'm not going to be the top performer because I know I can't keep up that type of work for that many years. And so then I was able to evaluate it for human resources and really discover that. So yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And then those relationships really carry on.
Yeah, and we have so many people joining us, asking questions. So, keep bringing your questions in. I know we have, let me find the list here. We have Pamela from New Jersey, Eric from California, Michelle from Houston, and Lewis from Florida. So welcome. And, one of the things I want to ask you about is actually, it's not a question. Someone sort of mentioned, Nadine said, she's at a point where she'll take anything right now. And I think there's a lot of job seekers who maybe were laid off many months ago at the height of the pandemic, and now they're entering month 6 or 7. For someone who's maybe in that position and they say, listen, I'll take anything, what should they do? Should they take anything, or should they sort of stick it out and say, okay, I really need to double down on finding the right job for me?
Yes. So I hear this a lot. And one thing I tell job seekers is I'll post something on LinkedIn and say something like, you shouldn't just be blasting out your resume to every role, not really paying attention to the job description, not really thinking about reaching out to anyone at the company. And people's responses to me is, but Madeline, I need a job. I need a job fast. And so that's why I do this. And this mentality breaks my heart because it's actually the slowest possible way to get a job is to not put any effort into your application, just be spraying it out everywhere, and to have then your message on your resume be for one job and then your LinkedIn profile say something else. It's actually, and people, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? When you start focusing your skills and your messaging on one type of role. And when I say one type of role, I mean, it could be like a generalist role, right? Being in general a lawyer, right? And maybe there's, it's just general counsel or something like that. You're not really pigeonholing yourself, but I see people who will say, oh yeah, I'll do marketing, product management, customer support, and human resources. And it's no one's going to hire you if you brand yourself that broadly, because they want person who's going to add the most value, not the person who is shallowly skilled in many areas. And so when you are able to then kind of tap into what skills you're bringing to the table, and it doesn't have to be super narrow, but LinkedIn profiles with people who are branding themselves with certain industries and that kind of stuff actually get more traction because they're looking for you to fill a certain need. So definitely really think about what is the need you're going to fill, and don't be afraid to focus your branding on that.
I think that's great advice. And actually, the upcoming edition of Get Hired, which is my newsletter, will focus on motivation, which is, I think, a lot of times, people, they drain themselves of motivation over time. So it's important to sort of recapture that and find little strategies to say, oh, I have a boost today, and I could really sort of re-engage with that. So I think, that idea and the importance of sort of not just accepting any job is so important. And another question we have here, and I think this taps into your inside HR perspective, is from Ari. And he asked basically, why is it okay for employers to suddenly ghost applicants who've put a lot of work into their interviews? It seems to be a growing trend.
So there isn't an answer of why it's okay, right? I think it's really demoralizing. It's so tough to not hear back from from companies. The thing I will say is the only reason a company hires is because they have more work than they have people. If you're trying to get in contact with a company that's hiring like crazy, if you're trying to get into contact with a hiring manager, they're often doing their own job and the job that you're interviewing for. It's this paradox of the only time you hire is when you're the most busy person in the organization. And so then hiring is almost like this entire other job. So I think that the bottom line, and so this is not an excuse for why it happens, but more of you need to not take it personally. You need to not read into it. Oftentimes, when you actually follow up with that company and say, "Hey, I'm still really interested. Want to let you know I'm still available. Let me know if you need anything else from me." So many times, and I've coached thousands of job seekers. So many times the company comes back and goes, "Oh yeah, we've just been really busy with our product launch. We're not thinking about you 24/7. But since you reached out to us, we actually do want to interview you. We just, we have other jobs, we have other things going on, but please, let's set up a video call." So just don't be afraid to follow up. They have so much other things going on. They're not constantly thinking about this role. They're overworked, they're overburdened, and they probably think you're amazing, and they just are losing everything in the shuffle.
Definitely. And also, it's always important to be nice to recruiters, even if you think you're being ghosted. And I think I'm a prime example of that is that when I was being interviewed by LinkedIn, I actually didn't hear back for like a month. And it was just, I left the door open. And what happened was, people went on vacation, people got busy, and they just sort of had a pause movement for a little while. And here I am.
And there you are. Yeah.
2.5 years later. So it's important to just realize that, companies have struggles, and they, people have to maybe go on vacation, take leave sometimes. So it may, even if you say, "Oh, I'm being ghosted, they didn't like me," that may not be the case. They may come back, 1 month, 2 months down the road and say, "Hey, sorry about that. We want to pick up where we left off." So you want to always leave the door open for that to happen. And we have a question here that came in from Adam. And I think this is the first time I'm hearing this, but I think it's a great question. And it's about retraining in companies. So I think a lot of times companies, especially during a pandemic, maybe a business unit has dried up for them and they say, "Listen, we don't need as many people over there, but would you like to retrain and come over to this other unit?" So what should people know about retraining in the workforce? So, if a company offers that, what should they consider before maybe making that pivot inside a company?
Yes. So and this is just a message out for anyone who's looking to make a career change, it is so much easier to make a career change when you're within a company. So that is a really cool opportunity. And if you are feeling a little stagnant in your career right now, thinking about how you can make a career pivot within a company is a lot better than starting new and trying to apply to elsewhere and making a pivot. You can still absolutely make a pivot if you aren't at a company right now. That is, that's something that I teach very widely. But to go to your question, what I would say is you need to soul search before you job search or job switch. What needs to happen is if you're going to switch into a new department, you better have spoken to a lot of people in that department, really ask them, again, as basically an internal informational interview. You do not need to try a job. You do not need to take a job to know what it's like. When you know your strengths and values, you put it through an evaluation of really understanding what is the job like, what is the day-to-day, does that fit my values, does that fit my strengths? And if you then really evaluate that, and so don't make the move unless you have already done that, you've already spoken to people in those jobs, and then you can feel really confident about the move. And if it's not the right move, maybe go elsewhere in the company and do a nice little sampler of all different jobs, figure it out. And that will help you to be much more confident in your next move.
I think that's great. And I did that at my last company. I was a medical reporter for a long time. And I sort of got to the point where I'm like, I want to do something different. And it was easy to go to, someone I knew who ran a team. And I said, do you have any openings? Because I kind of want to do what you guys do. And, before I knew it, I was there, and that set me up to move to LinkedIn, actually. So it's really great to actually be able to sort of maneuver within a company and see how they're doing it, and also have the familiarity of your employment. It's almost like having a security blanket in a way. So I think that's fantastic advice. And, we have a question here, and I think we talked a little bit before the show about, your brand is self-made millennial, and we're millennials and people love to hate us. But ageism is a thing that happens across the spectrum. So you have people who are just entering the workforce, and they have, maybe little experience, but entry positions are asking for a ton of experience. And then you have older workers who feel really left out of the workforce. So we have a question here from David about how you combat ageism. And for people who are applying and communicating, what's the best way to go about that, toward a recruiter or a talent professional?
Yes. Okay. I love helping with the ageism question because it's like something that I'm very passionate about of breaking, because it's horrible. So with ageism, and I'll maybe focus a little bit more on if you're on the older end. So the thing that companies are worried about is that you will be bored in the position and you're going to take it just to kind of get by until you find something better. Or that it's going to not be challenging enough for you, or that you will feel weird, or there'll be some weird dynamic between you and maybe someone who is 5-10 years younger than you managing you, right? These are all assumptions that are really unfair. And so what you need to do is you need to position yourself as really showing why this role will be a nice challenge, why this role is exactly the right next step for you. And really, even in the interview, talking about how you really have like a growth mindset. Unfortunately, it's like that is like the part that they really want to hear from you the most is, I've even heard, kind of older candidates, like I've coached them to say things like, yeah, like I've loved working, with these people on my team, and some of them are even younger, and I've learned so much from them. Like really just saying that you are someone who learns from others versus is someone who is fully baked and has all the information. That's what they're kind of like, those are the things that freak them out. And so if on your resume, I don't typically recommend putting objective statements, but maybe in something like a summary or highlight section, you might kind of summarize that you are someone who is like looking to make a switch into a certain industry because you want to grow more, or you want to go from a manager back to an individual contributor position because that is something you want to go back to the type of role that you're actually really passionate about. And so kind of like quelling these hesitations they have of like, oh, well, they were a manager before, like, are they really going to want to be an individual contributor? And they make up that story for you. So if there's any way that you can get ahead of that story, put it in your cover letter, put it on your summary section of how you are looking to grow and expand in this role in a way that you're kind of connecting the dots for them of why would someone at this age want this job? You need to write that story for them.
I think that's such good advice. And I think that mindset idea is really important going into it, because I think once you've been in the workforce for like a decade or so, and I see this with myself, you look at your resume and you say, look at what I've accomplished, and why wouldn't someone want me to do that? And then really what happens is you end up sort of saying, you should hire me because of what I've done in my past. But in reality, what you should be pitching is, here's what I've done in my past, and this is how I could use it to help you. So it's not just sort of, I've been doing this for a decade or 2 decades and I deserve the spot. It's, I have all this experience and I could utilize it to help you. So I think that advice is such wonderful directive. And we have a question here that I think sort of follows that line, and which is, it's from Liliana. Does it look good or bad to have long-term jobs these days? And I think I think the world of work is changing, where people are jumping from job to job quite quickly after a few years. So people who've been at a position for a decade or more, they start worrying about that. So what should people do if they have a few long-term jobs on their resumes?
It's so funny, Andrew, because it's like short-term jobs are bad, long-term jobs are bad. It's like,
Well,
ah!
I remember when I was at my last employer, I was there for almost a decade, like 7.5 years. And my friends were going from company to company. And, I started worrying. I'm like, is there something wrong with me that I'm not doing that? So there's definitely anxiety attached to it.
Yeah, it's a funny world we live in. So I would say, weirdly enough, yes, there is this like, oh, you've been there for 20 years or you've been there for 10 years or whatnot. Like, what's going on there? What I look for is in if you have been somewhere for a long time, I think that shows loyalty. I think that shows compatibility. I think it's a great sign. I think the most important thing to show is progress, career progress. So one of the things that I rate the highest on a resume is what I call an achiever pattern. So an achiever pattern is especially where I see you either like constantly like, even if it's like organizations you're not paid for, like you rise to a leadership role or something like that, or you have great achievements on your resume. But the number one thing that shows an achiever pattern is a series of promotions or even lateral moves. Basically, a company saying, we value you. We're going to either promote you or keep moving you around the organization because you're so valuable. And so I think that the number one thing is, if you are in a role for a long time, again, I think that's awesome. I think you need to really like make sure you don't settle in too much. Like, it's great to really be vouching for yourself for promotions and moves throughout the company. And then when you're interviewing, really tell a dynamic story of how it's been a growth process the past 10 years versus I come in, I do the same thing. It's been the same thing for 10 years. For some professions that may be fine, but for a lot of these highly skilled professions, they want to see this dynamic work pattern. So really thinking through that. And so you can spin it however you like. And that can really help.
Excellent advice. Yeah, I think that sort of growth, even if you're in one spot, is really what you need to do. And I see resumes a lot of times where they'll have sort of the position, but then they'll break it down into like, this is what I did in the entry part of that job, and here's what I did the next few years. So I think that's really great advice. And then, I think going back to something we talked about earlier, we talked about during ageism, is about being overqualified for some jobs. And, I think the pandemic has caused people to really rethink about what they're doing, what they want to do with their careers. And Kathleen wants to know what to do when you're overqualified, but willing to take a step back to help maybe a small business thrive. So I think a lot of people are saying, maybe I don't want to be, a manager of 15 people anymore, but I want to sort of still keep working. What should people do in those situations so that way they're not passed over because they say, listen, we can't hire this person, they're too experienced.
Right. So especially once you get to be more experienced, you're in the manager level and above, there really shouldn't be a reason why you're continuing to apply online. It should always be that you are reaching out to people at the company, building relationships, and getting your resume through that way. Again, people say, oh, this is the long way. It's actually the faster way. So when you do that, when you build relationships, you're then able to better and more authentically tell your story and why you're interested in these roles. And so if you are able to talk to someone at a company and then they refer your resume in, and maybe, first of all, your resume more seriously because it has that person's name stamped across it, if this is a referral. And then second, when someone says, oh, like this person seems like they're a VP level and this is a manager level role or whatnot, that person can then speak for you and say, oh, no, like, she was in this industry before, took a break, and actually she's been reskilling, and this is why she's really interested in that. So it's all about the why for the employer. Basically, they definitely want to hire skilled people, but again, they're worried you're going to leave. They're worried you're going to get bored. And so we overemphasize, hey, I have all of these skills. Why wouldn't you want me? I have all of these skills, and underemphasize why we want the job and why that company. So don't think about, let me tell my story. Think about, here's what they want. How can I position myself to say, this is exactly what I want as well? Here's like the skills I have to fit that, but also here's why I think that this would be a great match. Really focusing on that company and speaking their language. And that's the way I've seen so many professionals who are, quote, overqualified break in and still get the job.
And, as a follow-up, and this is just me asking, is what about cover letters? Because it sounds like in that case, a cover letter would be very important, so you could make that case. What are your thoughts on cover letters in general?
Yes. So the thing, Andrew, is that you can never depend on a cover letter being read. So anything that's super important needs to also be on your resume. I coach, all of my students in my executive career accelerator program of like really making sure that in that summary section, in that highlight section, we are like, if there's any like hesitations that a company has, that we're hitting them there. But you're absolutely right. I am also super pro cover letter. A cover letter is read maybe half the time. It's like a flip of a coin whether or not your cover letter is going to be read. And so, but the bottom line is that I've seen so many decisions of if someone's on the fence of whether or not to bring you in, the cover letter can make or break it. The reason why the cover letter is so valuable is because if you're like looking at this person, like who let's say is overqualified, you're like, why do they want this job? I don't get it. And then you read the cover letter and you go, oh my God, like they have been, let's say they're applying to LinkedIn. They're like, they have been a LinkedIn power user for the past 10 years. And they've tuned in to every get hired thing. And they're Andrew's biggest fan. And they've been, this is a job that they feel like they're going to really grow in. Oh, okay. Now I understand why they're making this switch and they want to do this job. And so that then helps them get the interview.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because I think, a cover letter will rarely hurt. What I always say is make it worth the recruiter or HR person's time, because they don't want to go through the process of opening a cover letter and it just says, please see my resume attached. I think that probably infuriates them. So I think that's fantastic advice. And then, I think, a great question to end on, since we're running out of time, is from Adam. And I think this goes back to a little bit of what we talked about in the beginning about sort of focusing a job search. And how do you find the right role that pairs with your values and quality of life? So he's specifically talking about, finding remote work. A lot of people are looking for that right now. But how do you find a job that aligns with what you want to get out of life and also what you sort of stand for?
Yeah, so there's so many ways you can go about this. And I love that he's asking this question, because this is exactly where like you should make sure you have that set before really pursuing anything. And so one of the things I did was I looked at my strengths, and I just like throughout school, I was always like a really hard studier, but like when it came to my psychology classes, like I just got it. Like I like intimately just like understand human behavior, and I'm able to break it down. And so every class I took in psychology, it was just like I effortlessly just was able to memorize everything, which had never happened to me before in my life. And I thought, okay, if this is a strength, what do people who are also good at psychology, what careers do they go into? And so I looked at school psychologists, I looked at speech language pathologist, I looked at a psychiatrist, I looked at human capital consultant, a market researcher, all these different roles, right? And I talked to all these different people. I think I actually just went on LinkedIn and I typed in psychology, looked at anyone who's a first or second degree connection, and saw what their job is and asked to talk to them about their job. I talked to so many people. I did not really understand what human resources was when I went on this journey. But when I talked to someone in human resources, it hit every single value. It's collaborative. It has teamwork involved. The pay is great. The upward mobility is great. All these things that I really wanted. And so it's a journey. It's not a fun journey per se. It's a long journey. It's kind of, unfortunate when you realize that so many things you just really don't want to do for the rest of your life. But once you find it, it's like, I know, like, I love my job. I love doing it every day. The reason why I'm on here right now talking about this is because I'm super passionate about it, and that's what keeps me going. And so it's a long journey, but then once you do it, like I don't foresee any like career switches in my career. Like I think I'm on this trajectory, and it really is going to help me to position myself for all future jobs.
Yes, and your passion is definitely evident, and we appreciate you sharing it with us today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and hopefully everyone saw Madeline's little LinkedIn link at the bottom of your screen. You can see it there now. So be sure to give her a follow. She's always posting really great advice. And then join us next Friday because we will have another episode of Get Hired Live with Melanie Denning, who is a resume expert. That's September 25th at noon Eastern time. And you could find the link. Juliet, who's one of our wonderful assistants in the background selecting your questions, will be posting the link, and you could also find it in the post with this video. So give that a follow for RSVP, where we cover a lot of these questions. I saw Maria and Danielle talking about, the questions they've had. So be sure to RSVP. And then coming up on Monday was very exciting here at LinkedIn News. We're launching LinkedIn News Live. So every day except Friday, because that's my day, we'll have LinkedIn News Live talking about what's happening in the world. And we have Kat Cole, who's the CEO and president of Focus Brands. So Focus Brands is everything from Jamba Juice to Cinnabon to, all the things you eat basically when you're trying to focus. That's what she's the CEO and president of. So be sure to tune into that. It's going to be really interesting, wonderful conversation. And I hope to see you here next week. And obviously Monday is when Get Hired, the newsletter, comes out. And until then, until we meet again, I hope you're staying safe and taking care of yourself. You could only get a job. You can only be a good candidate for a job if you're taking care of yourself. So follow the recommendations of your local health officials to do that. And remember that even when job searching feels really lonely and maybe things aren't going your way right now, the wind is at your back and we're rooting for you. No one wants to see people out of work. So you have an entire community that's really supporting you and rooting for you. Until then, be safe, be well, and good luck.